It started as a whisper, a quiet rumor that spread like wildfire through Hollywood circles. Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson seen together again after years apart. At first, it sounded impossible. They hadn't been photographed together in nearly a decade. Their lives had taken different paths. Jamie, devoted husband and father, living quietly away from the spotlight. Dakota, an established actress carving her own identity far from the shadow of 50 Shades. Yet, somehow, fate, or something like it, had pulled them back into the same frame. The whispers began in London, late one evening, after an exclusive film industry gathering. It wasn't a red carpet event, no flashing cameras or screaming fans. Just a small private dinner for old friends, tucked away in a dimly lit restaurant in Notting Hill. And among those guests, two familiar faces found each other again after nearly 10 years. They didn't expect to see each other, a source said. But when they did, everything stopped for a moment, like time had folded back on itself. Jamie arrived quietly, dressed in a simple gray coat, his expression calm as always. Dakota was already there, laughing softly with friends, her presence radiant and understated. When their eyes met across the room, the noise faded into nothing. For a heartbeat, it felt like 2015 again, the years of 50 Shades, the interviews, the laughter, the unspoken understanding between two people who had shared something the world never truly understood. They didn't rush to greet each other. Instead, it was a slow approach, cautious, almost shy. But when they finally spoke, witnesses described it as warm, genuine, and deeply familiar. There was no tension, no awkwardness, only that invisible connection that once captivated millions. They talked for a long time, the source continued. You could see they weren't just catching up about work. There was something emotional in the way they looked at each other. For years, fans had wondered if Jamie and Dakota had ever stayed in touch. After the 50 Shades trilogy ended, both had gone their separate ways. No public reunions, no collaborations, no shared appearances. Jamie had retreated into family life with Amelia Warner, raising his daughters and choosing privacy over publicity. Dakota, meanwhile, flourished in her own right, starring in indie films, falling in love, growing into a woman far removed from Anastasia Steele. But somehow, the world never stopped linking them together. Their names always came as a pair, Jamie and Dakota, two halves of a cinematic phenomenon that changed their lives forever. And now, after all these years, that connection had quietly resurfaced. Reports say the reunion wasn't planned. It was a coincidence, or perhaps destiny disguised as one. They talked about their careers, their families, the strange weight of fame that once bound them together. But beneath the small talk lingered something more, something left unspoken all these years. There was a softness between them, said another insider. Like people who had once shared too much and were finally ready to speak again. For Dakota, it must have been emotional. She had often spoken fondly of Jamie in interviews, describing him as a wonderful friend and a safe space during one of the most intense roles of her career. Jamie, too, had praised her repeatedly, calling her brave, generous, and one of the most honest people I've worked with. But after the films ended, their lives diverged, and like many deep but temporary bonds, theirs had been left suspended, unfinished. Until now. Witnesses described their conversation that night as quiet but intimate. They weren't flirting, the source insisted. It felt more like closure, or maybe reopening a door they weren't sure should stay closed. When they left the restaurant, separately, of course, Jamie reportedly smiled, a rare, genuine smile that hadn't been seen in public for a while. Dakota looked thoughtful, almost wistful, as she disappeared into the London mist. Within hours, fans had found the grainy photos, Jamie's familiar silhouette, Dakota's unmistakable coat. The internet did what it always does, it exploded. Are they back? Is this real? Old flames never die, one headline read. But those who were there that night knew better. It wasn't about scandal or secrets. It was about two people, older now, quieter, maybe wiser, finding a moment of peace in each other's presence. Still, one question lingered in the air long after they said goodbye. Was this just a nostalgic encounter between old friends, or was something long buried beginning to spark again? Because sometimes, even after the years have passed and the world has moved on, there are connections that never truly fade. They just wait for the right moment to return. In the days that followed their quiet reunion, neither Jamie Dornan nor Dakota Johnson said a single word. No statements, no clarifications, no denials. Just silence, the kind that only deepens curiosity. But behind that silence, those who knew them sensed something had shifted. It wasn't just a friendly catch-up, one insider said. There was emotion there, a lot of it. Jamie returned to Belfast soon after, where he was shooting his latest project. On set, he seemed calm, composed, but those close to him noticed a subtle change. He was more reflective, a crew member shared. He'd zone out sometimes, like he was somewhere else. Perhaps he was. Perhaps he was still in that London restaurant, replaying Dakota's laughter, the familiar spark in her eyes. For Dakota, it was much the same. She flew back to Los Angeles, slipping into the rhythm of interviews and premieres. Yet, when she spoke, there was a new softness in her tone, as though something unresolved had finally found its way back into her thoughts. During one interview, a journalist asked her what she thought about nostalgia and unfinished connections. She smiled slightly before replying, "Sometimes, the past doesn't really stay in the past. It finds you when you least expect it." Fans caught it instantly. They knew exactly who she meant. Behind the scenes, those words lingered. People close to Dakota said she'd been surprisingly quiet since London. She said it felt strange seeing him again, a friend revealed. It wasn't awkward, it was emotional. Like meeting a version of yourself from another lifetime. The truth is, 50 Shades had bonded them in ways few could understand. They had built a world of intimacy and trust, one that required absolute vulnerability. That kind of connection doesn't vanish just because cameras stop rolling. It settles, it fades, but it never dies completely. And when they met again after nearly a decade, it was as if no time had passed at all. Jamie, in private conversations, admitted that the reunion had stirred something inside him. Not romantic, necessarily, but deeply human. "She was a big part of my life," he reportedly told a close friend. "Not just because of the films, but because she saw me at a time when I was still figuring out who I was." It wasn't about rekindling an affair. It was about acknowledging a bond that fame, distance, and time had tried to erase. Yet, rumors inevitably began to swirl again. Headlines screamed, "Jamie and Dakota back together," and social media exploded with theories. Fans analyzed every detail, from the timing of their schedules to the smallest gestures in interviews. Amelia Warner, Jamie's wife, was once again thrust into the conversation she had never asked for. But unlike years before, this time she stayed serene. A source close to the family said, "Amelia trusts him. She knows what they went through before. She's not threatened by nostalgia." For Jamie, the reunion didn't mean betrayal. It was, in many ways, closure. There were things left unsaid, another insider explained. They both needed to look at each other as who they are now, not who they were 10 years ago. And in doing so, perhaps they both found peace. A reminder that not every deep connection has to end in love, or last forever, to be meaningful. Still, those who saw them that night swear there was something in the air. A kind of electricity that only happens when two souls recognize each other. "You could see it in their eyes," said one observer. They weren't two actors catching up. They were two people who once shared something the world could never quite define. As the dust settled, Jamie continued his work, and Dakota returned to hers. They didn't speak publicly again, nor did they meet, at least not where anyone could see. But the idea of them, Jamie and Dakota, the pair who once made millions believe in impossible love, had once again taken hold of the world's imagination. Weeks later, when Jamie was asked in an interview whether he still kept in touch with Dakota, he smiled, his answer careful but genuine. "We shared something special," he said. "That doesn't just disappear." It wasn't confirmation, nor was it denial. It was the kind of answer that left room for wonder. And perhaps that's exactly how both of them wanted it. Not a rekindled romance, not a headline, but a quiet, human truth. That sometimes, the most powerful reunions don't reignite old fires. They remind us that the flame was never really gone. As one friend put it perfectly, they didn't fall back in love. They just remembered what love once felt like. Somewhere in London, under that same misty sky, the memory of that night still lingers, not as scandal, but as a soft echo of two souls who met once again, not to start over, but simply to say, without words, I remember.